Earth had lost every major battle in the first 2 years of the war. That was the truth nobody in the Unified Earth Command liked to say out loud, but everyone on the bridge of the warship Meridian knew it anyway. The Voran Dominion had come from beyond the Outer Rim, with ships larger than cities, and weapons that could melt a moon in a single pass. Humanity had nothing that could match them in raw power, so humanity had done what it always did when it was outmatched. It got clever. The Meridian looked like an ordinary heavy cruiser from the outside. It had the same gray hull plating as every other ship in the Earth fleet, the same rows of point defense turrets, the same tired old engines that groaned every time they pushed past standard cruising speed. Any Voran scout that scanned it would see a ship worth barely a second glance, one more human vessel thrown into the meat grinder of the war. That was exactly what Earth wanted them to think. Deep inside the Meridian, buried under 3 layers of false hull plating and a maze of decoy conduits, sat something that did not belong to this century. The engineers who built it called it the Anvil. Nobody outside a small circle of scientists and one very tired ship captain knew what the Anvil actually did. All the crew knew was that a section of the ship, Deck 14, was permanently sealed, guarded by Marines who did not talk, and powered by a reactor that was not listed on any schematic given to the crew. Captain Elena Cross had commanded the Meridian for 3 years. She had gray starting to show at her temples even though she was only 38, the kind of gray that came from stress rather than age. She stood on the bridge now, watching the tactical display show a swarm of red contacts closing in on the human colony of Ashen Reach. 31 Vovoran warships. The Meridian and 4 smaller escort vessels stood between them, and 40,000 civilians on the ground. "Report," she said quietly. Lieutenant Okafor, her tactical officer, did not look up from his console. 31 confirmed hostiles. Lead ships are 2 Vovoran heavy carriers. Rest are escort class. They are not slowing down, Captain. ETA to weapons range, 11 minutes. And our escorts? Antietam, Hoyt, Reyes, and Park are holding formation on our flanks. They're scared, Captain. I can hear it in the comm chatter. They should be scared, Cross said. So am I. She meant it. Fear was not weakness. Fear was information. It told her that the odds in front of her were as bad as they looked, and she needed every scrap of that fear to keep her mind sharp for the next 11 minutes. She turned to the officer standing near the rear of the bridge, a broad-shouldered man with oil-stained hands, who looked like he belonged in an engine room rather than a command deck. Chief Engineer Marcus Doyle had built more of the Meridian with his own hands than anyone alive, and he was the only person besides Cross who had full access to Deck 14. "Marcus," she said, "status on the Anvil." Doyle's jaw tightened. "Charged and ready, same as it's been for 6 hours. But Elena, I need to say this again. We use it now, in a fight this size, against this many ships watching. We're not just risking discovery. We're guaranteeing it." "I know." Command said hold it for the line, for the big battle everyone thinks is coming. If we burn it here, over one colony, and word gets back to Voran Command that Earth has something new. "I know, Marcus." Cross did not raise her voice, but something in her tone made him stop. "But if Ashen Reach falls, there are 40,000 people down there who don't care about the line. They care about tomorrow morning. I am not going to let a strategic secret matter more than 40,000 lives, unless I have no other choice." Doyle exhaled slowly. "Understood, Captain. I'll hold the trigger and wait for your word." The bridge fell into the particular kind of silence that only happens before a battle. The silence where everyone is listening to their own heartbeat and pretending they are not. Cross watched the red dots crawl closer on the display. She thought, as she often did in these moments, about how the Anvil had come to exist in the first place. 3 years earlier, before the war had truly begun, a research team working under Earth's deepest classification level had been studying something recovered from a derelict alien vessel found drifting near Jupiter. That vessel was not Voran. It was older, and whoever built it was long gone. Inside it, the researchers found a device unlike anything humanity had built. It did not fire a beam or launch a missile. It did something stranger. It could reach into the space around a target and simply collapse it, folding the distance between 2 points until anything caught in the fold was crushed by forces no shield could stop. The scientists had been terrified of it. Early tests had gone wrong, in ways that killed people, and left craters where testing facilities used to stand. But when the Vorin arrived and started burning through Earth's fleets like they were made of paper, someone in the government made a decision. They took the device, refined it as much as they dared, and built a warship around it. Not a warship that looked special, a warship that looked ordinary, so that whatever waited on the other side of first contact would never suspect the truth until it was far too late. They named the device the Anvil because Doyle had joked, during an early briefing, that it was the kind of thing you dropped on someone's head when you wanted the problem to simply stop existing. The name stuck. Contact, Okafor said, snapping Cross back to the present. Enemy carriers are launching fighters. Estimate 200 small craft inbound. Cross, this is Antietam. The voice of Captain Reyes on the escort ship crackled through the comm. We are not going to survive contact with that many carriers, Meridian. Requesting orders. Cross closed her eyes for 1 second. Just one. Then she opened them and became, once again, the calm center that her crew needed her to be. All ships, form up on the Meridian. Point defense crews, prepare for fighter screens. Okafor, target the lead carrier with everything we've got that isn't a secret. Let's make them work for this. The battle began the way most space battles began, with distant flashes of light that looked almost beautiful from a distance, and were, up close, the deaths of hundreds of people at a time. The Vorin fighters swept in first, fast little raider craft armed with plasma cannons that chewed through the Meridian's point defense grid. Cross watched her crew fight with a kind of controlled desperation, every gunner squeezing out every possible shot, every engineer coaxing a little more power from systems that were never meant to handle this much strain. 12 minutes in, the escort ship Hoyt took a direct hit from one of the carrier's main guns and folded in on itself like a crushed can. Cross heard the scream of static where Hoyt's channel used to be, and then nothing. 280 people, gone in an instant. Captain, Doyle said quietly from behind her. Elena, look at the board. She looked. The Viridian carriers were repositioning, moving to flank the remaining human ships in a pincer that would leave nowhere to retreat. Reyes and Park would be caught in the open. Ashen Reach's orbital defenses, already weak, would not survive what came after. How long can they hold? Cross asked. 4 minutes, Okafor said. Maybe 5 if they're lucky. Cross thought about the colony below. She thought about the secret buried in the walls of her own ship, the thing that had cost lives to build, and might cost the whole war, if the wrong people learned of it too soon. She thought about 40,000 people who had no idea how close they were to losing everything. She made her decision, the way she always did, quickly and without looking back. Marcus, she said, bring the Anvil online. Target the lead carrier. We use it once, and only once, and then we bury it again. Doyle did not argue this time. His hands moved fast over a console that had no business being that responsive for equipment officially listed as decommissioned. Anvil is spinning up, 30 seconds to full charge. Helm, get us between the carriers and the Antietam. I want a clean line of fire. The Meridian groaned as it pushed harder than its outer shell suggested it could. On the display, Cross watched her ship slide into position, a small gray shape placing itself between two monsters and a group of frightened humans who had no idea what was about to happen. Anvil charged, Doyle said. His voice had gone very quiet, the way it always did, right before he did something he was afraid of. Fire, Cross said. Nobody on the bridge, except Cross and Doyle, understood what happened next. There was no beam of light, no visible weapon discharge at all. For half a second, the space around the lead Vorin carrier simply seemed to fold, like a piece of paper being crushed by an invisible hand. Then the carrier was gone, not destroyed in the way ships were normally destroyed, not broken into debris that could be studied and understood, but compressed into something smaller than a single room, a dense knot of metal and whatever remained of the crew inside it. The silence on the Vorin channels that followed lasted almost 10 full seconds, then chaos. The remaining carrier broke off, its escorts scattering in every direction. Fighter craft turning back toward their motherships in confusion. Whatever discipline the Vorin fleet had a moment before evaporated in the face of something they had never seen and could not explain. They're retreating, Okafor said, disbelief clear in his voice. Captain, they're actually retreating. Cross allowed herself exactly one breath of relief before turning back to business. Doyle, Power down the anvil completely. I want every trace of that energy signature scrubbed from our logs before anyone thinks to ask a scanner drone to sniff around. Already on it, Doyle said, though his hands were shaking slightly as he worked. Using the weapon never got easier for him, no matter how many times he had to do it. In the minutes after the retreat, the bridge crew allowed themselves a brief, shaky kind of celebration, the sort that comes from people who had expected to die and did not. Okafor let out a breath he had clearly been holding for the better part of 10 minutes. Somewhere behind Cross, a junior officer laughed once, a strange broken sound that was half relief and half disbelief, and nobody blamed her for it. Cross did not celebrate. She watched the drifting debris field where the Antietam's escort formation had been pressed hardest, watched the slow tumble of wreckage that used to be the Hoyt, and felt the particular hollowness that came after every battle she survived, while others did not. She had learned, over 3 years of command, that this hollowness never fully went away. It simply became something she carried alongside everything else. Captain, Solomon's predecessor on sensors, a steady older man named Petrov, spoke up from his station. Orbital defense platforms at Ashen Reach are requesting status. They want to know if it's safe to stand down alert. Tell them to hold alert status for another 6 hours, Cross said. I don't trust a retreat I can't explain. If the Vorin regroup and come back, I want that colony ready. Understood, Captain. Cross turned to Doyle, who was still monitoring Deck 14's readings, with the intensity of a man watching a wound, to see if it would start bleeding again. Marcus, talk to me. Is the anvil stable? Stable, and fully powered down, he said. Energy signature, scrubbed as best I can manage from our own logs. Whatever the Vorin scout ships picked up, I can't do anything about that now. But nothing originating from inside this ship will point back to what we did. Good work. Elena, he added quietly, stepping closer so the rest of the bridge crew would not overhear. I need you to understand something. That was not a clean use. The containment field flexed further than it ever has in testing. If we'd needed a second discharge inside the next 20 minutes, I don't know that the reactor would have held. We got lucky today, in more ways than just the tactical outcome. Cross absorbed that information the way she absorbed most bad news these days, without visible reaction, filing it away to worry about later when there was time to worry properly. Then let's hope we don't need luck like that again anytime soon. The Meridian spent the following 2 days in orbit above Ashen Reach, assisting with recovery efforts and standing watch in case the Vorin fleet returned with reinforcements. Cross used the time to visit the colony in person, something she rarely allowed herself to do, walking through hastily repaired streets and speaking with survivors who had no idea how close they had come to losing everything, and no idea what had truly saved them. An elderly man named Halverson, who ran a small hydroponics operation on the colony's eastern edge, approached her outside a temporary shelter, where families displaced by the fighting were being housed. Captain, he said, extending a weathered hand, the local council wanted me to pass along their thanks. Whatever you did up there, it turned back 31 ships that were going to burn this colony to the ground. We don't understand how. We're just grateful you did it. Cross shook his hand, feeling the particular weight of gratitude she could not fully accept, not when the truth behind it remained locked away in a classified program that even most of her own crew did not fully understand. Just doing our job, she said, which was true, and also nowhere close to the whole truth. Whatever it takes to keep us safe, Halverson said. We trust the fleet to do it. That's all any of us can ask. Cross carried those words with her back to the ship, turning them over in her mind during the long transit back toward the border patrol routes that made up the bulk of the Meridian's duties. Trust, she thought, was a strange and fragile thing to build a war around, especially when so much of what her ship did depended on the very people trusting her having no idea what she was truly capable of. Ashen Reach was saved that day, though the cost had been high. 280 souls on the Hoyt, dozens more wounded across the fleet, and a colony below that would spend the next weeks rebuilding what little the orbital fighting had damaged. Cross filed her official report, calling the retreat of the Vorin fleet an unexplained tactical withdrawal, the kind of vague language that satisfied bureaucrats who did not want to ask too many questions. But somewhere in the vast Vorin fleet, on a command ship many light years away, a report was being filed too. A single scout drone, one of the few that survived the retreat, had recorded a strange energy reading in its final seconds before its sensors failed. Nobody on the Voran side understood what it meant yet, but someone, somewhere, had started asking questions. High Marshal Threx of the Voran Third Fleet was not a patient being by nature, but 3 centuries of conquest had taught him the value of patience, when the alternative was making the same mistake twice. He stood in the command chamber of his flagship, the Dominion's Reach, staring at a small holographic recording that had been salvaged from the wreckage of his scout drone. The image was crude, distorted by the drone's dying sensors, but it showed something unmistakable. A human warship, unremarkable in every visible way, had somehow erased one of his heavy carriers from existence without firing a single conventional weapon. No beam, no missile, no visible energy discharge that matched any weapon in the known catalog of human or Voran technology. "Show me the ship's designation again," Threx said. His intelligence officer, a thin creature named Vess, with pale gray skin and 6 clawed fingers on each hand, gestured, and the display shifted to show the identification tag pulled from long-range scans. Human designation, Meridian. Classification in our records, standard heavy cruiser. Unremarkable specifications, unremarkable crew complement. Nothing in prior engagements suggests this vessel possesses unusual capability. And yet it made one of my carriers disappear. Yes, Marshal. Threx was quiet for a long moment, his 4 eyes narrowing as he studied the recording again. He had commanded fleets against a dozen species across 3 centuries of Voran expansion. He had seen desperate defenders use every trick available to them, from suicide runs to improvised weapons cobbled together from scrap. But he had never seen anything erase a ship the way this human vessel had erased his carrier. Not destroyed, erased, as if the ship and everyone aboard it had simply been folded out of existence. Humans are clever, Vess offered carefully. It is possible this was some kind of experimental weapon, untested and unstable. It may not be repeatable. Or, Threx said, it is exactly what it looks like. A weapon they do not want us to know about. Humans are proud, Vess, and prouder still of their secrets. If they have found something like this, they will hide it, as long as they possibly can, and they will only use it when they believe they have no other choice. What are your orders, Marshal? Threx turned away from the display, moving toward the wide viewport that looked out over the assembled might of the Third Fleet, over 200 warships, stretching across the void like a curtain of iron and fire. Behind that fleet, further back along the supply lines that stretched to the heart of Voran space, an even larger force was gathering. The Dominion had grown tired of a war that should have ended within months. The High Council wanted results, and Threx intended to give them results. Increase surveillance on all human vessels matching the Meridian's class and origin, he said. I want every scrap of data on where that ship has been, what battles it has fought, and what happens around it that does not make sense. If the humans have built something new, I want to know before it is used against my fleet again, not after. And the offensive planned for the border sectors? Proceeds as scheduled. We will draw the humans into a battle large enough that if this weapon exists, they will be forced to use it more than once. A single use tells us little. A pattern tells us everything. Threx's mouth curled into an expression that on a human face might have been called a smile, though on his, it looked closer to a grimace. Let them think their little secret is safe, Vess. Secrets have a way of dying the moment someone starts looking for them hard enough. Back aboard the Meridian, 3 days after the battle at Ashen Reach, Cross sat alone in her quarters, reviewing the casualty reports from the Hoyt. She had written condolence messages to 280 families, and she intended to write every single one herself, rather than let a computer generate them from a template. It was slow, painful work, but she believed the families deserved at least that much honesty from the woman who had sent their loved ones into battle. A soft chime interrupted her. Doyle's voice came through the comm. Elena, you should see this. Long-range sensors picked up a Vohoran scout ship. It's been shadowing our patrol route for the last 6 hours, keeping well outside weapons range. Cross set down her datapad. Just watching us? Just watching. Keeping careful distance. Matching our course changes almost exactly. Whatever it's doing, it's not random. She felt something cold settle in her stomach. The particular kind of dread that came from confirming a fear she had not wanted to say out loud. They saw something at Ashen Reach. They're looking for a pattern. That's what I think too, Doyle said. Elena, if they start connecting the Meridian to strange things happening in battle after battle, It won't matter how well we hide the anvil physically. They'll figure out what ship to watch, and eventually, they'll figure out why. Cross stood and walked to the small viewport in her quarters, looking out at the endless dark scattered with distant stars. Somewhere out there, hidden among that vastness, an enemy fleet was gathering for something bigger than anything she had faced before. She could feel it coming, the way sailors of old used to feel a storm on the wind, a pressure in the air that had no explanation except experience. "Command wants us to save the anvil for the big battle," she said quietly. "The one everyone keeps talking about, but nobody can quite describe. The line." "You think it's really coming?" "I think the Voran are tired of losing time to a war they expected to win in months. I think whatever fleet gathers next will be bigger than anything we've seen yet. And I think when it comes, we won't have the luxury of choosing whether to use the anvil or not." She turned back to Doyle, and for a moment, the exhaustion in her face was plain, unguarded, the face of a woman carrying more than any one person should have to carry. "I think we need to prepare for the day the secret stops being a secret, Marcus, because I don't think that day is as far away as Command wants to believe." Doyle nodded slowly, then hesitated before speaking again. "Can I ask you something, Elena? Not as your chief engineer, just as someone who spent 3 years helping you carry this." "Go ahead." "Do you ever wonder if we're wrong to keep it hidden at all? I don't mean tactically. I mean morally. We found alien technology we don't fully understand. We built a weapon around it that can erase a ship full of people without leaving so much as a scorch mark, and we've kept that fact from our own government's public oversight, from most of the fleet, from the very people whose lives depend on whether we use it correctly. Some nights I lie awake wondering if secrecy was ever really about strategy, or if it became something else somewhere along the way." Cross considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I think secrecy was necessary at the start, when we didn't understand the device well enough to control the panic that would follow if the wrong people learned about it too soon. Whether it's still necessary now, whether it's still right, I honestly don't know anymore, Marcus. I only know that every time I've had to choose between protecting the secret and protecting the people in front of me, I've chosen the people. Maybe that's the only answer I have to give you." "It's a good answer," Doyle said quietly. "I just hope it's still a good answer when the choice gets harder than it was at Ashen Reach." Cross did not have a response to that, because she suspected he was right to worry. She returned to the bridge that evening and stood for a long while at the viewport, watching the stars slide past in their slow, indifferent procession, thinking about the shape of the war still ahead of them. The Voran scout ship remained at the edge of sensor range, patient as a held breath, and somewhere far beyond it, an empire was gathering its strength for whatever came next. Outside the Meridian's hull, unseen and unheard, the Voran scout ship continued its patient watch, recording every course change, every burst of engine power, every small detail that might one day form the shape of a secret too big to stay hidden forever. The war that had already cost so much was about to enter a new and far more dangerous phase, one where the question was no longer whether Earth had a weapon capable of turning the tide, but how long humanity could keep the enemy from learning its name before the final battle arrived. 6 weeks passed after the battle at Ashen Reach, and the Meridian did not have a single quiet day among them. Word of the strange retreat at Ashen Reach had spread through the fleet in whispers, the kind of story that grows a little more impossible every time someone new tells it. Some sailors said the Meridian had a ghost weapon. Others said Captain Cross had made a deal with something not of this galaxy. Cross ignored all of it, because the alternative was confirming any part of it, and confirming any part of it was not something she was willing to do. Command finally called her back to Earth for a face-to-face briefing, the kind that happened rarely, and never for good news. She stood in a secure conference room beneath the surface of what used to be Colorado, facing 3 admirals and a woman from the Ministry of Defense, whose name Cross had never quite managed to remember, though she remembered the woman's cold eyes well enough. "Captain Cross," said Admiral Whitfield, the senior officer in the room, "your report from Ashen Reach describes an unexplained tactical withdrawal by enemy forces. We would like the real story." Cross kept her face perfectly level. "That is the real story, Admiral. The enemy withdrew. I don't have a full explanation for their decision-making." Whitfield's eyes narrowed slightly, but it was the woman from the ministry who spoke next. "Captain, we built the Meridian around Project Anvil, at extraordinary cost, in secrecy so tight that fewer than 40 people alive know the full scope of the program. We are aware, through channels that do not concern you, that a Voran heavy carrier vanished from all sensor readings in the exact battle you are describing as an unexplained withdrawal. We would like you to stop wasting our time. There was a long pause. Cross looked at Doyle, who sat beside her, his jaw tight but his eyes steady. Then she looked back at the panel. I used it, she said simply. There were 40,000 civilians on Ashen Reach, and 4 crews under my command, who would not have survived another 5 minutes. I made the call to use the anvil once, targeted at the lead carrier, and then I shut it down and scrubbed every trace of the energy signature I could find. I stand by that decision. Whitfield leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. Understood, Captain. For what it's worth, given the circumstances, I would likely have made the same call. He glanced at the ministry woman, who did not look pleased but did not argue either. But this is exactly the situation Project Anvil was designed to avoid. Command's position remains that the weapon is reserved for a decisive engagement, not individual colony defense actions, however dire. With respect, Admiral, Cross said, the weapon does no good sitting unused while people die waiting for the decisive engagement to arrive. I understand the strategic logic. I don't disagree with it in principle. But I will not let 40,000 people die today so that a secret survives for a battle that might happen next year. That is precisely the problem, the ministry woman said coldly. Every time you make that choice, Captain, you shorten the amount of time before the enemy understands exactly what they are dealing with. Intelligence reports indicate increased Voforan scout activity around vessels matching the Meridian's profile. They are watching you, Captain. Every time the anvil fires, that watching gets sharper. Cross did not have a good answer for that, because it was true. She had felt the weight of that scout ship's silent observation for 6 weeks now, the sense of being studied like an insect under a lens. She simply nodded and said, Understood. I'll use my judgment, and I'll accept the consequences if Command disagrees with it. Before they left the conference room, Admiral Whitfield asked Cross to remain behind for a moment, while the others filed out. Once the door closed, his stern expression softened just slightly, the mask of command slipping for a rare instant. Off the record, Captain, he said. I read every report from Ashen Reach personally, twice. What you did saved a colony that would otherwise be a memorial by now. I want you to know that not everyone in that room sees you as a problem to be managed. Some of us see you as the reason we still have a chance at winning this war. Thank you, sir. That means more than you probably realize. The ministry will keep pushing for tighter control over when and how you use the anvil. That's their job, and I won't pretend they're entirely wrong to worry about it. But my job is fielding a fleet that can still win battles, and right now, your ship is the sharpest tool we have. Use your judgment, Captain. I'll back you as long as I can. Cross nodded, grateful for the small measure of solidarity, even as she recognized how thin the ground beneath her truly was. I'll try not to make that support difficult to give, Admiral. See that you don't. Whitfield allowed himself the ghost of a smile. Dismissed, Captain. Get some rest before you head back out there. You look like you need it. The meeting ended without any real resolution, which was, Cross reflected, as she and Doyle walked back toward the shuttle that would return them to the Meridian, exactly how most conversations with Command tended to end. Everyone agreed on the problem. Nobody agreed on the solution. And the war continued, regardless of what anyone in a conference room decided. They're scared, Doyle said quietly as they walked. Command, I mean. Not of the Voran. Of us. Of what happens if the whole galaxy learns that a single human ship can erase capital vessels without firing a shot anyone can detect. They should be scared, Cross said. I'm scared too. We built something we don't fully understand, based on alien technology we found by accident, and now we're staking the war on it. Do you regret it? Cross thought about the question longer than she expected to. No, she said finally. I regret that we needed it. I don't regret building it. There's a difference. Back aboard the Meridian, the following weeks brought a string of smaller engagements, skirmishes along the border, where Voran raiding parties tested human defenses, without committing to anything decisive. Cross came to recognize the pattern for what it was, probing attacks, designed less to capture territory than to draw out information. Every time the Meridian was deployed to one of these skirmishes, she noticed the same scout ship, or one just like it, lurking at the edge of sensor range. She resisted using the anvil during every one of these smaller fights, relying instead on conventional tactics, clever positioning, and the simple stubbornness of a crew that had grown to trust her judgment completely. They won some of these skirmishes and lost others, but none of the losses were catastrophic, and none of the wins required unveiling the ship's true nature. One such skirmish nearly cost the Meridian dearly, not because of enemy strength, but because of a mechanical failure that had nothing to do with the anvil at all. During a defense of a supply convoy near the Tycho relay station, one of the ship's primary coolant lines ruptured under combat stress, forcing Doyle and his engineering team to perform emergency repairs, while plasma fire raged outside the hull. Cross remembered standing on the bridge, watching damage reports scroll past, and thinking that for all the exotic danger the anvil represented, it was still the ordinary, unglamorous parts of the ship that could kill them just as easily. They survived that engagement through nothing more exotic than good training and steady nerves, and Cross found a strange comfort in it. Not every battle needed to be won by a secret weapon. Sometimes a well-drilled crew and a captain who kept her head was enough, and she treasured those victories more than she expected to, precisely because they cost nothing but skill and courage. It was during one of these smaller engagements, a defense of a mining outpost called Kepler Station, that Cross first met Rhea Solomon, a junior sensor officer who would later become one of the most important people on the Meridian's crew, though nobody could have predicted it at the time. Solomon was 24 years old, sharp-eyed, and possessed of the particular kind of restless intelligence that made her both an excellent officer and a minor headache for anyone trying to keep secrets from her. She had been assigned to the Meridian only 2 months earlier, and in that short time, she had already noticed things that other crew members had learned not to ask about. "Captain," she said one evening, catching Cross in the corridor outside the officers' mess, "may I ask you something off the record?" Cross studied the young woman for a moment. Solomon's file was clean, her service record exemplary, her loyalty never questioned by anyone who had reviewed her background. "Go ahead." "Deck 14, Solomon said. "I've run diagnostics on every other section of this ship as part of my job, Captain, and I've never once been able to get clearance for Deck 14, not even to check that the sensors reading from that section are calibrated correctly. I'm not asking because I want to pry into classified programs. I'm asking because there are inconsistencies in the ship's power readings that I can't explain through any official schematic, and it's making my job harder." Cross considered several possible responses, weighing honesty against security, trust against risk. In the end, she chose a version of the truth that satisfied without revealing too much. "Deck 14 houses a classified research program that predates your assignment to this ship, Lieutenant. I understand the inconsistency in your readings is frustrating, but I need you to trust that it's accounted for at a level above your clearance, and mine, frankly. Can you work around it without official access?" Solomon studied her captain's face for a long moment, clearly recognizing that she was being told exactly as much as she was going to be told and no more. "I can work around it, Captain. I just wanted you to know that if anyone else on this crew is running the same diagnostics I am, they're going to notice the same inconsistencies eventually. I'm good at my job, but I'm not the only good sensor officer in the fleet." It was, Cross reflected later, a fair warning, and one she took seriously. She raised the concern with Doyle that night, the two of them meeting in his cramped engineering office surrounded by data pads and half-disassembled equipment that never seemed to find its way back into working order. "She's right, of course," Doyle said, rubbing his eyes with the heel of his hand. "I've tightened the shielding around the anvil's power signature 3 times now, and every time, someone sharp enough eventually notices something doesn't add up. We can hide the weapon. We can't hide the fact that something is being hidden. Not forever. Not from people who are actually good at their jobs." "What's the answer then?" "Honestly, I don't think there is one. Long term, every ship in this fleet, with something to hide, is racing the clock against every sharp-eyed officer and every patient enemy scout trying to figure out the truth. All we can do is buy time. Enough time to win the war before the secret gets out, or enough time to prepare for what happens after it does." Cross did not find that answer comforting, but she recognized it as the most honest one available. She spent that night, as she often did when sleep would not come, walking the quiet corridors of her ship, past crew members on night watch who nodded respectfully as she passed the sealed door to Deck 14, where 2 Marines stood guard in absolute silence. It was during one of these late walks that she received the message that would change the direction of the war entirely. A priority alert from Fleet Command, routed through the highest levels of encryption available to a ship of the Meridian's classification. She read it twice in her quarters, before calling Doyle and her senior officers together for an emergency briefing. Long-range reconnaissance has detected an unprecedented buildup of Vohoran forces along the Kestrel corridor, she told them, the display behind her showing a star map marked with a swelling red cluster that seemed to grow larger every time the sensors updated. Current estimates place enemy strength at over 400 capital ships, with additional forces still arriving. Fleet Command believes this is the offensive we've been anticipating. They're calling it the Line, the battle meant to break Earth's remaining defenses once and for all. Okafor let out a low whistle. 400 ships. That's more than double anything we've faced before. It gets worse, Cross continued. Fleet Command's projections show that if this force reaches Earth's home system unopposed, our remaining defenses will not hold more than a matter of days. Every available ship, including the Meridian, is being recalled to form the primary defensive line at the edge of the solar system. This is, by every estimate Command has run, the battle that decides the war. The room was silent for a long moment. Every officer present understood what this meant without needing it spelled out. If this was truly the decisive battle Command had been waiting for, then the question of whether to use the anvil was no longer a question at all. It was a certainty. Doyle, Cross said quietly, what's our status on the anvil after all this time? Fully charged, fully tested, within safe parameters, and more stable than it's ever been, Doyle said. But Elena, I need everyone in this room to understand something. Every previous use has been a single, controlled strike against a single target. If Command wants us to use this weapon in a battle of this scale, against a fleet of 400 ships, we are moving into territory we have never tested. I don't know what the anvil does if we try to push it beyond a single target. I don't know what happens if we're forced to fire it more than once in rapid succession under combat stress. We built this thing to be a scalpel, not a weapon for a battle this size. Then we'll have to learn fast, Cross said, because in a battle with 400 enemy ships watching every move we make, there will be no way to hide what we do. If we use the anvil at the line, the whole galaxy will know Earth's secret before the battle even ends. The only question that matters now is whether that secret is enough to win, and whether we can live with what it costs to use it. Nobody in the room had an answer to that question. Not yet. But as the Meridian turned course and began the long journey back toward Earth's home system, every soul aboard understood that they were sailing toward something that would either save humanity or reveal, once and for all, exactly how much humanity had been willing to risk in order to survive. 3 days into the journey, Solomon requested a private meeting with Cross, one that the captain granted with some hesitation, remembering their earlier conversation in the corridor. Solomon arrived at the captain's quarters with a datapad clutched in both hands, her expression a careful mixture of professionalism and barely restrained curiosity. "Captain," she said, once the door had closed behind her, "I want to be direct with you, because I think we're past the point where being indirect helps either of us. I've spent the last several weeks quietly cross-referencing sensor anomalies from every engagement this ship has fought in the past year. I know something happened at Ashen Reach that doesn't match the official report. I know Deck 14 isn't just a research program. And I know that whatever we're carrying on this ship, it's the reason the Voran have been shadowing us for 2 months." Cross studied the young officer for a long moment, weighing the risks of the moment carefully. Solomon was not making an accusation. She was, in her own careful way, offering something more valuable, the truth she had already assembled, along with an implicit question about what came next. "You're very good at your job, Lieutenant," Cross said finally. "I try to be, Captain. That's exactly why I'm coming to you directly, instead of speculating with the rest of the crew, or worse, drawing attention to it in a way that reaches ears we don't want listening. If we're heading into the largest battle of the war, and this ship is carrying something that matters as much as I think it does, I'd rather be useful to you than be a liability you have to manage." Cross was quiet for a long moment, considering the offer on the table. Then she made a decision that surprised even her, one born from the growing certainty that the days of keeping the anvil a secret from her own crew were numbered regardless of what she chose. "Sit down, Lieutenant," she said. "I'm going to tell you what Deck 14 really is. And then I'm going to ask you to help me figure out how to use it in a battle bigger than anything either of us has trained for." Solomon sat, and for the next hour, Cross told her everything. The derelict vessel found near Jupiter, the strange device recovered from its wreckage, the years of secret research, the careful construction of a ship built to hide the one weapon that might turn the tide of an unwinnable war. By the time she finished, Solomon's face had gone pale, but her eyes had also taken on a sharper focus, the look of someone who had just been handed a puzzle far larger than she expected and was already beginning to work out how to solve it. "Captain," she said quietly, once Cross had finished, "if we're going to use this thing in a battle with 400 ships, we need to understand exactly how it interacts with our own sensor grid, our own shields, everything. Because if the Voran figure out what it is mid-battle, they're not just going to retreat this time, they're going to come for this ship specifically, with everything they have, and we need to be ready for that, not just ready to fire the weapon." Cross nodded slowly, feeling for the first time in weeks that she was not carrying the weight of the secret entirely alone. "Then let's get to work, Lieutenant. We don't have much time left before the line, and I think you're right. Whatever happens in that battle, the secret does not survive it. The only question is whether we do." Over the following days, Solomon threw herself into the work with an energy that reminded Cross of Doyle in his younger years, before the weight of the program had settled permanently onto his shoulders. She spent hours in the sensor bay, cross-referencing every recorded discharge of the anvil against the ship's own shield harmonics, searching for ways to minimize the strange interference the weapon caused in nearby systems whenever it fired. "I think I've found something useful," she told Cross and Doyle one evening, 3 days after her briefing. "If we stagger our own shield frequency in a specific pattern, right before a discharge, we can reduce the feedback the anvil causes in our own sensors by almost 40%. It won't make the recharge any faster, but it means we won't go half-blind for a few seconds after every shot, which might matter more than we realize in a battle with hundreds of ships around us." "That's good work, Lieutenant," Doyle said, studying her data with obvious approval. "Better than good." "I hadn't considered the feedback problem from that angle at all." Solomon allowed herself a small, tired smile, the first Cross had seen from her since their conversation in the captain's quarters. "I want this ship to survive the line, Captain. I want the people on it to survive it too. If knowing the truth means I can help make that more likely, then I'm glad you told me, even if some nights it keeps me up wondering what else is out there that we don't understand yet." "Welcome to command," Cross said, not unkindly. "That feeling doesn't go away. You just learn to work through it." As the Meridian pushed on toward the gathering point where the human fleet would make its stand, word began filtering through the crew, in careful whispers and knowing glances, that something significant was happening aboard their ship, something beyond the ordinary rhythms of border patrol and skirmish. Cross did not confirm or deny any of it directly, but she noticed a subtle change in how her crew carried themselves in the days that followed, a quiet determination settling over decks that had, until recently, simply gone about their duties without much thought for the larger stakes of the war around them. Whatever came next, she thought, they would face it together, and that unity might prove to be worth more than any weapon, however powerful, could offer alone. The gathering at the edge of the solar system was unlike anything Earth had assembled before. Every warship that could still fly had been called home, from border patrols to training vessels, from the newest cruisers fresh out of the shipyards, to aging ships that should have been retired years earlier, but were needed now more than ever. Cross watched from the Meridian's bridge as the formation grew day by day, a wall of gray hulls stretching across the dark, 312 ships in total, against an enemy force that intelligence now placed at over 400 and growing. It was not enough, and everyone on that bridge knew it. Numbers alone would not win this battle. Something else would have to make the difference, and everyone who mattered in the chain of command knew exactly what that something else was supposed to be. Fleet Admiral Chen, the officer given overall command of the defense, called a briefing for every ship captain 3 days before the projected arrival of the Voran fleet. Cross attended via secure holographic link, standing in a virtual room alongside 300 other captains, most of whom she had never met, all of whom wore the same expression of grim determination that came from knowing exactly how bad the odds truly were. "The Voran fleet will arrive in approximately 72 hours, Chen said, his voice carrying the particular flatness of a man who had already accepted the weight of what he was about to say. Our formation will hold the line at the edge of the solar system, using the gravitational shadow of the outer planets to our advantage where possible. I will not lie to any of you. Conventional projections give us a survival rate for this fleet of less than 30%, and that assumes optimal conditions throughout the engagement. A murmur ran through the assembled captains, quickly silenced as Chen continued. However, Fleet Command has authorized the deployment of Project Anvil for the duration of this engagement, at the discretion of Captain Cross of the Meridian. Every eye in the room, even the holographic ones, seemed to turn toward Cross's projected image. For those of you unaware of this program, you do not need to be briefed on its details. What you need to know is this. If Captain Cross gives an order regarding enemy targeting priority or fleet positioning that seems unusual, you follow it without question. Her judgment in this matter carries the full authority of this command. Cross felt the weight of 300 stares, curious and uncertain in equal measure, but she kept her expression steady. She had expected this moment for weeks, ever since Chen first briefed her privately on the plan to use the anvil openly during the coming battle, rather than trying to hide it any longer. There was no more room for secrecy now. The only question left was whether the weapon, and the crew who operated it, could hold up under the strain of the largest battle humanity had ever fought. As the holographic link dissolved, and the virtual room emptied one captain at a time, Cross found herself lingering, watching the last few projections blink out of existence. A voice caught her attention before her own connection closed, one she recognized from a handful of joint fleet exercises years earlier. Captain Cross. The projection belonged to Captain Idris Malhotra of the destroyer Kiran, a broad-shouldered man with a calm, steady voice that had always struck Cross as the sort of voice you wanted beside you in a crisis. For what it's worth, whatever this program of yours turns out to be, I trust Chen's judgment in giving you this authority. My crew and I will follow your lead when the moment comes. Thank you, Captain, Cross said. I hope I earn that trust when it matters. You already have. As far as I'm concerned, Ashen Reach wasn't officially connected to your ship in any report I've read, but word travels among captains faster than command likes to admit. Good luck out there, Cross. I suspect we'll all need it. The connection closed, and Cross was left alone with her own thoughts for a long moment, before finally severing her own link and making her way back to the Meridian's bridge, carrying with her both the weight of Malhotra's trust and the uncertainty of whether she deserved it. After the briefing ended, Cross remained in her ready room for a long time, staring at the tactical projections Chen's staff had provided. Doyle and Solomon joined her an hour later, both looking as tired as she felt. We've run every simulation we can think of, Solomon said, setting a data pad on the table between them. The problem isn't whether the anvil can destroy enemy ships. It clearly can. The problem is recharge time between uses. Right now, best case, we're looking at almost 4 minutes between full-power discharges. In a battle with 400 enemy ships, 4 minutes is an eternity. Can we shorten it? Cross asked. Doyle shook his head slowly. Not without risking a cascade failure in the reactor core. We've pushed this system further than it was ever designed to go already. I could try to reduce charge time by drawing power from other ship systems, but that means weakening our shields or our conventional weapons at the exact moment we need them most. What about targeting smaller ships instead of capital vessels? Solomon asked. If we're not trying to erase an entire heavy carrier every time, maybe we can find a way to use partial discharges more efficiently, hit multiple smaller targets instead of a single massive one. Doyle considered this for a long moment. It's possible. We've never tried a partial discharge before. The device wasn't really designed with that kind of flexibility in mind, at least not according to the original research notes. But if the alternative is doing nothing while the fleet gets overwhelmed, it might be worth the risk. Cross looked between her two officers, feeling the particular exhaustion of a commander who had run out of good options and was left choosing between several bad ones. Do it, she said finally. Run every test you can in the time we have left. I want options on the table before that fleet arrives, not decisions made in the middle of combat when there's no time to think clearly. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of preparation. Doyle and his engineering team worked in shifts around the clock, testing partial discharge configurations on Deck 14, while trying to keep the ship's other systems from suffering too much strain in the process. Solomon coordinated with sensor officers across the fleet, quietly establishing a communication protocol that would let the Meridian receive real-time targeting data from every other ship in the formation without revealing exactly why that data was needed. Cross spent much of that time doing something she rarely had the luxury of doing, talking to her crew, not as their captain giving orders, but as a person trying to understand the people who would fight and possibly die alongside her in the coming battle. She walked through the engineering decks, the medical bay, the crew quarters, listening to concerns, answering what questions she could, and being honest about the ones she could not answer. In the mess hall on the second night before the battle, she found herself sitting across from a young weapons technician named Priya Anand, barely 20 years old, who had joined the Meridian's crew only 4 months earlier, straight out of the academy. "Captain," Anand said hesitantly, "can I ask you something?" "Go ahead. Are we going to win this? Tomorrow, or whenever it starts? Are we actually going to win?" Cross considered lying, considered giving the young technician the kind of reassuring answer that commanders were supposed to give to keep morale steady. But something about Anand's earnest expression made her choose honesty instead. "I don't know," she said. "I think we have a chance. A real one, not just false hope to get us through the next few days. But I won't tell you it's a sure thing, because it isn't, and you deserve better than empty comfort from your captain the night before a battle like this." She paused, then added, "What I can tell you is that every person on this ship, from the bridge to the engine room, has done everything humanly possible to give us that chance. That has to be enough, because it's all any of us have." Anand nodded slowly, seeming to find something steadying in the honesty, rather than being discouraged by it. "Thank you, Captain. I think I needed to hear that more than I needed to hear that everything would be fine." Cross found herself thinking about that conversation often in the hours that followed, as the fleet finished its final preparations, and the countdown to the Voran fleet's arrival ticked ever closer to zero. She thought about all the young faces aboard her ship, all the families waiting on Earth below, all the weight resting on a weapon that even its own creators did not fully understand. She made a point, in those final hours, of walking every deck of the Meridian at least once, greeting crew members by name where she could, listening to the low murmur of final preparations that filled every corridor. In the medical bay, Dr. Ibrahim and her staff were laying out surgical equipment, with the grim efficiency of people who expected to use every piece of it before the battle ended. In the Marine barracks, Lieutenant Vasquez ran his squad through one final equipment check, checking seals on armor and charge levels on weapons, with a thoroughness that spoke of a man who had seen enough combat to know that small oversights killed people just as surely as enemy fire did. "Captain," Vasquez said, noticing her in the doorway, "come to wish us luck?" "Something like that," Cross said. "How are your people?" "Steady," Vasquez said. "Scared, some of them, but steady. That's usually the combination you want going into something like this. The ones who aren't scared at all worry me more." Cross nodded, understanding the sentiment completely. "If this battle goes the way I fear it might, Deck 14 may need direct defense before the day is through. I need your best people ready to hold that section if it comes to it." Vasquez's expression sharpened with sudden understanding, though he did not ask the questions Cross could see forming behind his eyes. "Understood, Captain. Whatever's back there, it won't fall while my squad still has a pulse." "I appreciate that more than you know, Lieutenant." She continued her walk through the ship, ending finally in engineering, where Doyle and his team were running one last series of diagnostics on the Anvil's containment field, the low hum of the reactor audible even through the reinforced walls of Deck 14's outer chamber. Doyle looked up as she entered, dark circles under his eyes betraying how little sleep he had allowed himself in recent days. "Everything as ready as it's going to be?" she asked. "As ready as 3 years of work can make it," Doyle said. "I won't lie to you, Elena. I'm afraid of tomorrow. Not just of losing the battle. I'm afraid of what happens if we win it, by revealing everything we've built, and afraid of what happens to all of us, if the answer to holding this secret forever turns out to be that it can't be held forever at all." "Whatever happens," Cross said, "we'll face it together. That's the only promise I can make you tonight." Doyle managed a tired smile. "That's the only promise I need, Captain. Get some rest, if you can. Tomorrow is going to test every single one of us." On the Voran side of the approaching battle, High Marshal Threx stood on the bridge of the Dominion's Reach, watching his own fleet's formation stretch across the void ahead of him. 418 warships arranged in a pattern designed to overwhelm any defense the humans could muster. He had spent the weeks since Ashen Reach gathering every scrap of intelligence available on the strange human weapon, and while he still did not understand exactly how it worked, he had developed a working theory that he believed was accurate enough to plan around. "Report," he said to Vess, who stood beside him, studying a display of recent intercepted human communications. "Long-range surveillance confirms the human fleet has gathered at the edge of their solar system. Marshal, exactly as our projections anticipated. 312 vessels confirmed, though our sources indicate this represents nearly the entirety of their remaining military strength. Among the confirmed vessels is the Meridian." Threx's mouth curled into that familiar grimace that passed for a smile among his kind. "Good. Wherever that ship goes, their strange weapon goes with it. If we can identify its position early in the engagement and concentrate fire on it before it can discharge more than once or twice, we neutralize their greatest advantage before it becomes decisive. Our analysis suggests the weapon requires significant recharge time between uses," Vess said. "If the pattern from Ashen Reach holds, we may have several minutes between each discharge to locate and destroy the vessel carrying it." "Then that is our priority target," Threx said. "Not their flagship, not their largest formations. The Meridian, above all else. Whatever their strange weapon is, I intend to see it destroyed before this battle ends, one way or another." He turned to look out at his own overwhelming fleet, 418 ships representing centuries of Voran conquest and expansion, and felt the particular satisfaction of a commander who believed, correctly or not, that he had found the answer to his enemy's greatest trick. "Let the humans have their secret weapon, Vess. It will not save them if we know exactly where to aim." Vess hesitated before speaking again. A habit that Threx had learned over the years usually meant his intelligence officer had something uncomfortable to say. "Marshal, there is one more matter. Our engineers have made progress adapting the deflection plating recovered from the wreckage of our lost scout ships, the same technology we developed after our encounters with the old empires along the far rim. It will not stop the human weapon entirely, based on our models, but it may provide partial resistance if applied to our most important vessels." "Fit it to the Dominion's reach," Threx said without hesitation. "If the humans manage to target my own ship in the coming battle, I intend to still be standing afterward to see the results." "It shall be done, Marshal, though I must caution that our models are theoretical. We have never tested this plating against a weapon like the one the humans possess, only against more conventional forces we encountered generations ago. Then we will learn together whether theory holds against reality," Threx said. "That is, after all, the nature of war. Prepare the fleet, Vess. We depart for human space within the day." As his flagship and the vast fleet arrayed behind it began the long journey toward Earth's solar system, Threx allowed himself a rare moment of reflection, standing alone at the viewport of his private chamber, watching the stars slide past in silence. 3 centuries of Voran conquest had taught him that every enemy, no matter how advanced or how desperate, eventually broke before the weight of a sufficiently large and disciplined fleet. He believed, with the confidence of a commander who had never truly been defeated, that humanity would prove no different. He did not yet understand how wrong that confidence would prove to be, nor how dearly it would cost him before the battle at the edge of the solar system finally ended. Back aboard the Meridian, in the final hours before the battle, Cross gathered her senior officers one last time in the briefing room. The mood was quiet, focused, the particular calm that settles over people who have done everything they can to prepare, and now simply await the moment when preparation gives way to action. "I want to say something before this starts," Cross told them, looking around the room at Doyle, Solomon, Okafor, and the rest of her senior staff. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I am proud of every single one of you. This ship has carried a secret heavier than any crew should have to bear, and every one of you has carried it with more grace and more courage than I had any right to expect. Whatever the outcome of this battle, that will not change." Doyle was the first to speak. "For what it's worth, Captain, I don't think there's another crew in the fleet I'd rather be facing this with." "Same," Okafor said quietly, and murmurs of agreement passed around the room. Cross nodded, feeling something in her chest tighten with a mixture of pride and fear that she suspected would never fully separate from each other, not as long as this war continued. "Get some rest if you can," she said. Tomorrow, we find out if everything we've built here was enough. Nobody in that room slept well that night, but everyone reported to their stations the next morning, with steady hands and clear eyes, ready to face whatever the Voran fleet brought with it. On the tactical display, the red cluster that had been growing steadily for weeks finally resolved into individual contacts, hundreds of them, sweeping toward the edge of the solar system, like a storm that had been building on the horizon for far too long, and had finally decided the time had come to break. All ships, Admiral Chen's voice came over the fleet-wide channel, steady, despite the enormity of what was approaching. Hold formation. Hold the line. Humanity is counting on every one of us today, and I intend for every one of us to give them everything we have. Cross stood on the bridge of the Meridian, watching the enemy fleet grow larger on the display with each passing second, feeling the particular stillness that came in the last moments before violence began. Beside her, Doyle stood ready at his station, one hand hovering near the controls that would bring the anvil to full power the instant she gave the order. Solomon monitored a dozen sensor feeds simultaneously, tracking enemy formations with an intensity that had not wavered in days. Range to enemy fleet, 3 minutes, Okafor said, his voice carrying the particular tightness of a man about to face the largest battle of his life. Cross took one long breath, steadying herself for what was coming. Then let's give them something to remember, she said. All hands, prepare for combat. The line begins now. The battle began with a wave of long-range fire that turned the black space between the two fleets into a field of brief, brilliant flashes, each one a warship, somewhere taking damage or dying outright. Cross gripped the arms of her command chair as the Meridian shuddered under the first exchange, her shields flaring bright against a barrage of plasma fire from the leading edge of the Voran formation. Shields holding at 82%, Okafor reported. Antietam and Reyes report moderate damage, still combat effective. We've lost the Delacroix and the Fenwick already, Captain. Both destroyed in the first exchange. 2 ships, hundreds of lives, gone before the battle was even 10 minutes old. Cross forced herself not to dwell on it, because dwelling on losses in the middle of a battle this size was a luxury that would get everyone around her killed. Understood. Keep the formation tight. Doyle, status on the anvil? Charged and ready, Captain. Waiting on your word. Cross studied the tactical display, watching the chaotic swirl of ships locked in combat across a volume of space, larger than most solar systems' inhabited zones. The Voran fleet outnumbered them badly, but the human formation was holding, barely, using the gravitational cover of the outer planets to break up enemy formations and force smaller engagements, rather than one overwhelming charge. It was working, for now, but Cross could see the mathematics of attrition working against them with every passing minute. Solomon, give me a target, Cross said. Something that will matter. Solomon's fingers moved rapidly across her console, cross-referencing data from a dozen different ships in the fleet. There's a formation of 6 heavy cruisers pushing hard against our southern flank, Captain. If they break through, they'll be in position to hit the Antietam and Reyes from the rear within 4 minutes. Taking out the lead ship in that formation would likely force the rest to break off and regroup. Doyle, target the lead cruiser in that formation. Fire when ready. The anvil discharged in absolute silence, just as it always did, and for the second time in its brief history of combat use, a Voran capital ship simply ceased to exist in any recognizable form. The remaining 5 cruisers in that formation broke off exactly as Solomon had predicted, confusion and fear disrupting their attack pattern long enough for the Antietam and Reyes to reposition and avoid being flanked. But this time, unlike Ashen Reach, the discharge did not go unnoticed. Across the battle, dozens of Voran sensor arrays caught the strange signature of the weapon's use, and within moments, High Marshal Threx's voice was carrying across every channel his intelligence officers could intercept, redirecting a significant portion of his fleet's firepower toward a single target, the Meridian. Captain, Solomon said, her voice tight with sudden alarm, we have multiple squadrons changing course, converging on our position. I count at least 30 ships redirecting toward us specifically. Cross felt the cold certainty she had been dreading for weeks settle into her chest. They know, she said quietly. They've figured out this ship is the one that matters. Across the wider battle, other human ships were noticing the same shift in enemy behavior. On the Kirin, Captain Malhotra watched 3 Voran cruisers break away from an engagement with his own vessel and turned sharply toward the Meridian's position, and understood immediately what it meant. He keyed his comm without hesitation. "Meridian, this is Kieran. We see what's happening. Falling back to cover your flank, whatever you need." "Kieran, appreciated," Cross replied. "Watch yourselves out there. Whatever's coming for us is going to be ugly." "That's exactly why we're coming, Captain. Kieran out." Cross allowed herself a brief flicker of gratitude toward Malhotra's promise from the briefing, made good now in the middle of the worst fighting either of them had ever seen. Other ships began adjusting their formations as well, word spreading through the fleet's tactical network that the Meridian needed protecting, even if most of the captains providing that protection did not fully understand why. It was, Cross thought, a strange kind of faith, offered by strangers who trusted Chen's judgment enough to risk their own ships defending a secret they had never been told. "Orders, Captain?" Okafor asked. "Evasive maneuvers. Full power to shields. Doyle, I need that recharge time cut down, whatever it takes." "I can push it," Doyle said, already working furiously at his console. "But Elena, every second I shave off that recharge comes from somewhere else. If I pull more power to the anvil, our shields and weapons take the hit. Do it anyway. We won't survive long enough to need shields if we can't clear a path through what's coming for us." The Meridian banked hard, engines screaming, as the ship's helmsman threw it into a series of evasive maneuvers that would have been impossible for a ship its size only a year earlier, before Doyle's modifications had quietly improved its engine capacity far beyond factory specifications. Plasma fire streaked past the hull, some of it finding its mark, sending shudders through the ship that rattled equipment and crew alike. "Shields at 61%, Okafor called out. "We've got incoming fighters. Looks like they're trying to force us to burn point defense capacity, while the capital ships close the distance. Solomon, I need eyes on every ship converging on us. Prioritize the biggest threats." "Working on it, Captain, but there are too many contacts to track individually at this range. I can give you the largest cluster, but I can't promise it's the most dangerous one." Cross made a decision in the half-second she had to make it. "Give me the largest cluster. Doyle, status?" "Recharge at 70%. I need another 90 seconds. "We might not have 90 seconds. The Meridian shook violently as a direct hit found its shields, the lights on the bridge, flickering for a heart-stopping moment before emergency power kicked in. Somewhere below decks, an alarm began sounding, indicating a hull breach on one of the lower levels. Cross forced herself to stay focused on the tactical picture, rather than the damage reports pouring in from every direction. "Hull breach on Deck 9, Okafor reported. "Emergency crews responding. We've lost point defense turret 4 and 5. "Casualties?" "Unknown yet, Captain. Damage control is still assessing." Down in the affected section, Dr. Ibrahim and her medical teams were already moving through the smoke-filled corridors, treating burns and crush injuries with the same steady calm that Cross had come to rely on in every crisis the ship had faced. A young technician named Osei had been closest to the breach when it happened, and though he survived, the blast had cost him the use of his left arm, at least until proper medical facilities could be reached. He refused evacuation to the medical bay until his station was fully covered by a replacement, insisting through gritted teeth that the ship needed every working hand it could get in the middle of a battle this size. Word of small acts like that traveled quickly through a ship under fire, and Cross made a private note, even amid the chaos of command, to remember Osei's name, and make sure it appeared prominently in whatever commendations followed this battle, assuming any of them lived long enough to write commendations at all. Cross clenched her jaw and turned her attention back to the approaching Voran formation, now close enough that she could see individual ship classes on the tactical display without needing computer analysis to identify them. Heavy cruisers, escort ships, and at the center of the formation, something larger, a command ship of a class she did not recognize, bristling with weapons, and moving with a purposeful confidence that suggested whoever commanded it believed they had already won. "That's their command element," Solomon said, her voice hushed with the particular dread of recognizing exactly how badly outmatched they truly were in this moment. "If they're bringing their command ship this close to the front line, they're not just trying to destroy us, Captain. They're trying to make a statement. They want to be the ones who end this." "Then let's disappoint them," Cross said, though her voice carried less confidence than her words suggested. Doyle, status. Recharge complete. Anvil ready to fire. Cross looked at the tactical display one final time, weighing the decision that had to be made in the space of a single breath. She could target the approaching command ship directly, a strike that might throw the entire Vahoran assault into confusion if it worked, or she could continue targeting the smaller formations threatening to overwhelm the rest of the human fleet, buying time for the broader battle rather than gambling everything on a single decisive strike. Target the command ship, she said finally. If this works, it might break their whole formation. If it doesn't, we're no worse off than we already are. Locking target, Doyle said, his hands steady, despite the chaos rattling through the ship around him. Firing in 3, 2, 1. The anvil discharged, and for a fraction of a second, Cross allowed herself to hope that this single strike might end the battle before it truly began in earnest. But something had changed. The Voran command ship, rather than being erased instantly as every previous target had been, seemed to shudder and distort, its outer hull crumpling inward at the point of impact, while the rest of the vessel remained intact, damaged but very much still there. Report, Cross said sharply. What happened? I don't know, Doyle said, staring at his readouts with confusion plain on his face. The discharge hit, but the effect was partial. I think they had some kind of shielding we haven't encountered before. Something that resisted the full collapse effect. They adapted, Solomon said grimly. Or they've encountered something like the anvil before, and came prepared. Either way, Captain, that ship is still active, and it's still coming. The damaged Voran command ship, wounded but far from destroyed, continued its advance, and now every gun aboard it seemed to be turning specifically toward the Meridian, along with the surrounding formation of escort vessels that had closed the distance during the exchange. Cross realized, with the particular clarity that sometimes comes in the worst moments of a battle, that they were now the primary target of an enemy force that outnumbered and outgunned them, with a weapon that had just failed to deliver its expected result for the first time in its history. All hands, brace for impact, she called out, just as the first wave of return fire slammed into the Meridian's already weakened shields. The ship rocked violently, alarms blaring from every direction, as damage control teams scrambled to respond to failures across half a dozen decks simultaneously. Cross held onto her chair, watching the chaos unfold on every display in front of her, feeling the particular helplessness of a commander who had made the best decision available to her and watched it fail regardless. Shields at 30%, Okafor shouted over the noise. We've lost Deck 14's outer shielding, Captain. If they get a clean shot at that section, they'll see the anvil, Doyle finished grimly. The whole reactor housing, the containment field, everything. If our shielding fails there, there's no more hiding what this ship really is. Cross felt the weight of that realization settle over the bridge like a physical thing. Weeks of careful secrecy, years of research and sacrifice, all of it had been building toward this single moment, and now it hung by the thread of a shield generator that was failing faster than anyone could repair it under fire. Doyle, can you reroute power to reinforce Deck 14 specifically? I can try, but Elena, that means pulling power from somewhere else critical. Weapons, life support, engines. I don't have a magic reserve of power sitting around waiting to be used. Do what you can. Solomon, I need a status on that damaged command ship. Is it still combat effective? Still active, Captain. Still firing. But its movement pattern has slowed considerably. Whatever the anvil did to it, it wasn't nothing. It's just not what we expected either. Doyle, still monitoring his readouts with a frown of deep concentration, spoke up before Cross could give her next order. Elena, whatever shielding they used, it drew an enormous amount of power to hold even partially. I'm seeing residual energy spikes on their hull, consistent with a system running near total failure. If we can hit that ship again before it recovers, I don't think the same defense will hold a second time. How long until we can fire again? Normally 4 minutes. Solomon's shield staggering trick and the extra power I pulled might get us there in closer to 3, but that's still an eternity in a fight like this. Cross allowed herself a brief moment to consider the strange half-success of the strike against the command ship, filing away the observation for later analysis, even as the immediate crisis demanded her full attention. Something about the Voron's resistance to the weapon's full effect nagged at the back of her mind, a puzzle piece that did not quite fit the picture she thought she understood, but there was no time to solve it now, not with her ship's shields failing and the enemy formation closing for what looked increasingly like a killing blow. "Captain," Solomon said, her voice suddenly sharp with a new kind of urgency, "I'm reading a boarding craft launch from one of the escort ships. They're not just trying to destroy us anymore, Captain. I think they're trying to capture the ship." The realization hit the bridge like a physical blow. If the Voron believed the Meridian carried something valuable enough to risk boarding action in the middle of a battle this large, it meant they understood, at least partially, exactly what they were dealing with. And if they succeeded in boarding the ship, the secret that Earth had guarded so carefully for years would not simply be revealed. It would be captured, studied, and potentially turned against the very species that had built it. Cross felt her pulse quicken at the implication, understanding immediately the scale of the danger they now faced. A weapon lost was a setback. A weapon captured, studied, and eventually replicated by an enemy, with centuries more experience in warfare, and a fleet 10 times the size of humanity's own, was a catastrophe that could end the war in the worst possible way imaginable. "How many troops on that boarding craft?" she asked. "Estimate 40 to 50, Captain. Heavily armored based on the craft's mass signature. That's a significant force for a single boarding action. They're not sending a token squad to test our defenses. They're sending enough soldiers to take and hold a section of this ship by force." "All hands. Security alert," Cross said, her voice carrying across the ship's internal comm with a steadiness she did not entirely feel. "Prepare for possible boarding action. Marines to defensive positions, particularly around Deck 14. Whatever happens in the next few minutes, that section of the ship does not fall into enemy hands. Am I understood?" The response came back immediately from every station, a chorus of confirmation from a crew that understood, without needing further explanation, exactly what was at stake in the battle that was about to move from the space around their ship to the corridors within it. Cross gripped the arms of her chair, watching the boarding craft close the remaining distance on the tactical display, and understood that the secret she had guarded for so long was about to be tested in the most direct way imaginable. The final battle for the Meridian, and perhaps for the war itself, was no longer being fought only in the space outside the hull. It was about to be fought deck by deck, corridor by corridor, with the fate of Earth's greatest secret hanging on whether a single ship's crew could hold their ground against an enemy who finally understood exactly what they were fighting to protect. Cross gripped the arms of her command chair, watching Vasquez's Marines converge on the breach point on the tactical display, small blue icons moving with practiced discipline against a growing cluster of red ones. Outside, the wider battle raged on without pause, the Voron formation continuing to press against the weakened human line, even as their boarding action unfolded within the Meridian's hull. Somewhere in the chaos of it all, Cross understood, the true outcome of the war might well be decided in the next several minutes, not by the largest guns or the biggest fleet, but by a handful of Marines, fighting corridor by corridor, to protect a secret that had already cost so much to keep. "Solomon," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging both outside and within her ship. "Keep me updated on that command ship's status, the moment it's back within range. And somebody get me a status report from Vasquez every 30 seconds. I want to know the second either side gains ground down there." "Understood, Captain," Solomon replied, already dividing her attention between the external battle and the internal one, doing the work of 3 officers at once, because there was no one else available to share the burden. Cross watched her work with quiet admiration, grateful beyond words that fate had placed someone so capable on her bridge in this, the most dangerous hour the Meridian had ever faced. The boarding craft struck the Meridian's hull near Deck 12, cutting through the weakened outer plating with a screech of tortured metal that echoed through the corridors like a scream. Cross watched the breach alarm light up on her display, and felt her stomach tighten with the particular dread of knowing that the battle had just changed shape entirely. Throughout the ship, the sound of the breach rippled through every deck as a distant, grinding vibration felt more than heard, a reminder to every crew member aboard that the battle had crossed a threshold none of them had trained specifically to face. Sailors who had spent the fight at their stations, running power to shields or feeding targeting data to the guns, now found themselves reaching for sidearms kept in emergency lockers, uncertain whether the enemy might reach their section of the ship before the battle outside was decided. Marines are converging on the breach point, Okafor reported. Lieutenant Vasquez is leading the response team. Solomon, keep tracking that damaged command ship and the rest of the fleet outside, Cross said. Doyle, I need you down on deck 14. If they get through our Marines, I want you at the reactor controls personally. Elena, if I leave the bridge, then I'll manage the anvils targeting myself if I need to. Right now, I need you protecting the one thing this entire war might depend on. Go. Doyle did not argue further. He handed his console over to a junior engineering officer with a few rapid instructions and disappeared toward the lift that would take him down to the sealed heart of the ship. Cross turned her attention back to the tactical display, watching red icons representing Voran boarding troops spreading through the lower decks of her ship, even as the battle outside continued to rage without pause. Lieutenant Vasquez's voice crackled over the comm, tense and clipped, the sound of a soldier in the middle of close-quarters combat. Captain, we've engaged the boarding party at the junction outside Deck 12. They're better equipped than we expected. Heavier armor, better weapons. We're holding, but it's costing us. Casualties? 3 wounded so far, 1 serious. We're holding the line, Captain, but there's a second wave of boarding craft inbound according to sensors. If they keep sending more troops, we're going to run out of Marines before they run out of soldiers. Cross felt the particular weight of a decision that had no good options attached to it. She could pull Marines from other defensive positions to reinforce the fight at Deck 12, weakening the ship's ability to respond to threats elsewhere. Or she could hold her current formation and hope that Vasquez's team could handle the assault with what they already had. Solomon, is there any way to seal off the boarding party's path toward Deck 14 specifically, even temporarily? Solomon's fingers flew across her console. I can trigger the emergency bulkheads along Corridor 7, Captain. It would slow them down significantly, force them to find an alternate route. It won't stop them permanently, but it might buy us time. Do it. The ship shuddered as heavy blast doors slammed shut throughout the lower decks, sealing off the most direct path toward Deck 14, and forcing the Voran boarding party to search for another way through. Cross watched the tactical display shift as the invading force paused, clearly recalculating their approach, and felt a small measure of relief at having bought her crew even a few more minutes. At the junction outside Deck 12, Vasquez pressed his advantage during the enemy's confusion, pulling his squad back to a defensible choke point where the narrow corridor limited how many Varun soldiers could engage at once. His Marines fought with the discipline of long training and the desperation of people who understood exactly what they were protecting, even if most of them had never been told the specifics. They're trying to flank us through the maintenance shaft, Corporal Reyes Nunez called out, ducking behind a bulkhead as plasma fire scorched the wall above her head. Vasquez, if they get into that shaft, they'll come out right behind Deck 14's secondary entrance. Then we don't let them get into that shaft, Vasquez said, already moving to reposition 2 of his Marines toward the maintenance access point. Hold this junction. I'll take Okonkwo and seal that shaft myself. The fighting that followed was brutal and close, corridors lit by the flash of weapons fire, the air thick with smoke and the acrid smell of scorched metal. Vasquez and Okonkwo reached the maintenance shaft moments before the first Voran soldiers attempted to breach it, and the resulting exchange left both sides bloodied, but held the line long enough for the rest of the squad to consolidate their position at the main junction. But outside the ship, the battle showed no sign of slowing down. The damaged Voran command ship, though wounded by the Anvil's partial strike, continued directing fire toward the Meridian, alongside a swarm of escort vessels that seemed determined to finish what the boarding party had started. Cross watched her shields drop to 18%, then 15%, each percentage point representing another crack in the wall between her crew and total destruction. Captain, Okafor said, his voice tight, if our shields fail completely, we lose the ability to protect Deck 14 from direct fire, not just boarding parties. One good hit and there might not be anything left to fight over. Cross made a decision in that moment that she would later describe, when asked, as the hardest of her entire career. Solomon, target the damaged command ship again, full power discharge. If we can finish what the first strike started, we might break their formation entirely and buy ourselves room to breathe. Captain, Doyle isn't at his station to manage the discharge safely. If something goes wrong. I know the risks, Lieutenant. Prepare the discharge. I'll fire it myself if I have to. Down on deck 14, Doyle had just arrived at the heavily fortified chamber housing the Anvil's containment core, when the ship's comm system crackled with Cross's voice, relaying her intention to fire the weapon again without him present at the primary controls. He moved quickly to the secondary console built into the chamber itself, fingers flying across controls he had built with his own hands years earlier. "Elena, I'm here. I've got control," he said into his comm unit, sweat beading on his forehead despite the chamber's carefully regulated temperature. "Don't fire from the bridge. Let me handle it directly. It's safer this way." "Understood. You have the trigger, Marcus. Target is the damaged command ship. Fire when ready." Doyle's hands moved across the console with the practiced precision of a man who had spent years perfecting this exact process, even as the sounds of distant combat echoed through the ship's superstructure, the muffled thud of exchanged fire between Marines and Vahoran boarding troops growing steadily louder as the enemy found new paths through the ship's corridors. "Charging," he said, watching the reactor readouts climb steadily upward. "Discharge in 10 seconds. It was in that moment, with the Anvil building toward its second discharge of the battle, that the Voran boarding party finally broke through the last barrier between themselves and Deck 14. Doyle heard the distinctive hiss of an emergency door being forced open behind him, and turned just in time to see 3 armored Voran soldiers pour into the outer chamber, weapons raised, their strange alien eyes fixing immediately on the massive reactor housing that dominated the room's center. "Marcus," the voice over the comm was Vasquez, breathless and urgent. "They've broken through. They're in the outer chamber. We're right behind them, but—" Doyle did not wait to hear the rest. He slammed his hand down on the discharge control, even as the lead Voran soldier raised a weapon toward him, the Anvil's reactor flaring to full power, in the same instant that a Marine team burst through the corridor behind the boarding party, opening fire in a desperate bid to save the ship's chief engineer, and the secret he protected. Outside the ship, the damaged Voran command ship shuddered under the second discharge, and this time, whatever unusual resistance had protected it during the first strike failed entirely. The vessel folded in on itself exactly as every previous target had, collapsing into a dense knot of wreckage that had once been the pride of the Voran Third Fleet, taking High Marshal Threx and his entire command staff with it in an instant that offered no warning and no chance for escape. The effect on the surrounding Voran formation was immediate and total. Without their command ship directing the assault, and having just witnessed their supreme commander erased along with it, the coordinated attack that had been pressing against the Meridian and the surrounding human ships collapsed into confused disarray. Escort vessels broke formation, uncertain of their orders, some retreating outright while others simply held position, waiting for a chain of command that no longer existed to tell them what to do next. Back inside Deck 14, the firefight between Marines and the remaining Voran boarding troops ended within seconds of the discharge, the invaders caught off guard by the sudden violence of the reactor flaring to full power directly in front of them, giving Vasquez's team the opening they needed to finish the engagement decisively. Doyle stood shaking against the console, his hands still resting on the controls, staring at the bodies of the Voran soldiers who had come so close to seeing exactly what Earth had been hiding for years. "Marcus," Cross's voice came through the comm, tight with worry. "Report. Are you all right?" "I'm alive," Doyle said, his voice unsteady. "The boarding party is down. Vasquez's team got here just in time. Elena, they saw it. Before the Marines arrived, they saw the reactor. They saw the containment field. Even if none of them survived to report it, our secret isn't a secret to whoever they might have transmitted data to before the Marines cleared them." Cross closed her eyes for one brief moment, absorbing that information along with everything else the past several minutes had thrown at her. Whatever happened next in the wider war, the era of hiding the Anvil in complete secrecy was over. The only question left was whether the strike that had just killed High Marshal Threx and broken the enemy's command structure would be enough to win the battle, and perhaps the war, before the secret's exposure could be turned against them. "Solomon," Cross said, turning her attention back to the tactical display. "Status on the wider battle." "Captain, without their command ship, the Vaforan formation is fragmenting badly. Admiral Chen is reporting several other sections of the line, pushing back successfully, now that enemy coordination has broken down. I'm seeing retreat signals from at least a third of the remaining Vaforan fleet." Cross allowed herself, for the first time in what felt like hours, a small measure of hope. Keep tracking. Okafor, status on our own ship? Shields at 12% and holding. Hull breaches on decks 9 and 12 contained. Casualties still being assessed, but nothing catastrophic reported yet. We took a beating, Captain, but we're still here. In the immediate aftermath of the strike that killed Threx, Vasquez's Marines finished securing Deck 14, treating their wounded, and confirming that no further Voran troops remained active within the ship. Doyle emerged from the reactor chamber still shaking, but alive, and Cross made her way down from the bridge the moment the wider battle's chaos allowed her a spare few minutes, needing to see with her own eyes that the people who had protected the ship's greatest secret had survived to tell of it. "Marcus," she said, finding him slumped against the corridor wall outside the containment chamber. "Are you hurt?" "No," he said, though his voice carried the particular hollowness of a man who had come closer to death than he had ever expected to in an engineering assignment. "Just tired, Elena. More tired than I think I've ever been in my life. You saved this ship. Possibly the whole fleet." "Vasquez's Marines saved this ship," Doyle corrected. "I just pressed a button at the right moment. They're the ones who bled for it." He looked up at her, something raw and honest in his expression. "I keep thinking about how close it came. If they'd broken through 30 seconds earlier, if the Marines had been 30 seconds slower, everything we've built, everything we've sacrificed to keep this secret, would have ended up in Voran hands instead of ours." "But it didn't," Cross said. "We're still here, Marcus. That has to count for something." The battle continued for another 2 hours, though the character of it had changed entirely, from the desperate, overwhelming assault of its early stages. With their command structure broken, and their supreme commander dead, the Voran fleet's coordination fell apart section by section, allowing the human formation to consolidate its defenses and push back against an enemy that had, only hours earlier, seemed poised for total victory. By the time the last Voran ships retreated beyond sensor range, Admiral Chen's fleet had lost 63 ships, a devastating toll by any measure, but a toll that paled beside the alternative of total defeat that had seemed so close only hours before. In the aftermath, as damage control teams worked through the night to stabilize the Meridian and every other surviving ship in the fleet, Cross found herself standing on Deck 14 for the first time in months, looking at the reactor housing that held the Anvil's containment core, now surrounded by scorch marks and the aftermath of the firefight that had so nearly ended in catastrophe. Doyle stood beside her, exhaustion written plainly across his face. "We're not going to be able to keep this a secret much longer, Elena. Not after today. Too many people saw too much, on both sides." "I know," Cross said quietly. "Maybe that's all right. Maybe the secret was always meant to run out eventually, and the only question was whether we'd survive long enough for it to matter less when it finally did. What happens now?" Cross considered the question for a long moment, thinking about the reports she would need to file, the debriefings that would follow, the uncertain future of a program that had just saved the entire human fleet at the cost of its own secrecy. "Now," she said, "we tell Fleet Command exactly what happened here today. All of it. No more careful half-truths. If the Voran know what we have, then hiding it from our own allies serves no purpose anymore. Maybe it's time the rest of humanity learned what a few of us have carried alone for far too long." 3 weeks later, with the Meridian back in dry dock for repairs, and the immediate threat of Vahoran invasion pushed back for the first time since the war began, Cross stood before a much larger assembly than the small briefing room she had faced months earlier. Representatives from every major Earth government, senior officers from across the fleet, and the same cold-eyed ministry official who had once demanded she stop wasting everyone's time, now listened as Cross laid out, in complete detail, exactly what the Anvil was, what it could do, and what it had cost to keep it secret for as long as they had. "The war is not over," she told the assembled officials, her voice steady, despite the weight of everything she carried into that room. "The Voran will regroup, and they will come back, likely with a new commander and a new strategy built around what they now know about our capabilities. But we bought time today, more time than anyone believed we could, and we did it because a small group of people were willing to carry an impossible secret for as long as it needed to be carried." She paused, looking around the room at faces that ranged from grim determination to cautious hope. "I believe it's time to stop treating the Anvil as a secret to be hidden, and start treating it as a foundation to build on. If one weapon, built around technology we barely understand, could break the largest fleet the Verhoren have ever assembled against us, then perhaps our path forward isn't found in secrecy anymore. Perhaps it's found in understanding exactly what we've discovered, and building the future of humanity's defense around it, openly, together, rather than hidden away behind sealed doors and careful lies. The room was silent for a long moment after she finished speaking. Then, slowly, Admiral Whitfield rose from his seat and began to applaud, and one by one, the rest of the room joined him, a small but meaningful acknowledgement of everything that had been sacrificed to bring humanity to this fragile, uncertain moment of hope. Aboard the repaired Meridian, months later, Cross stood once more on her familiar bridge, watching new stars scroll past the viewport as her ship set out on its next assignment, no longer hiding what it carried, no longer pretending to be an ordinary vessel among many. The war would continue, the Vorin would return, and humanity's future remained far from certain. But for the first time since the war began, Cross felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in a very long time. The quiet, cautious hope that whatever came next, humanity would face it together, with its secrets finally brought into the light, and its people finally united behind the terrible, wonderful weapon that had bought them all a little more time to fight for tomorrow.